Walter, as you know, has been coming in from Sharm el-Sheikh. And I think we'll start our program forthwith. Rhea is on standby. She only has a few minutes. But Rhea, welcome to Humanity Rising from Egypt. And give us a report on what's happening.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm here. Apologies, my signal's been funny. We're all running around. You know, there's so much going on at COP, but I'm so happy to be here with you, Jim, and to just give a brief report on what's going on. So today, this is really where the rubber's meeting the road. We've got a ton of energy coming. This is really in advance of what's going to be some big announcements tomorrow from Biden and other world leaders. So today, you're seeing the congressional delegations descend. We saw John Kerry giving, at the Climate Justice Pavilion, we saw Al Gore giving a very compelling justice speech at the Climate Justice Pavilion. And we are all really looking forward to tomorrow when President Biden at around 5:15 is scheduled to come here and address everyone at the COP. And we expect major announcements. Whatever's been planned, whatever's going to be announced will be announced tomorrow. I was able to score a ticket to the speech. If I'm able to get in and out and speak to you after, I'll tell you exactly what I heard, but I suspect it may be available on television as well. So that's, who else was out? EPA Administrator Michael Regan is here, delegates are here, and it's really, in terms of the high profile folks, today and tomorrow is the day.
Okay, Rhea, well, listen, thank you so much. Maybe after Biden's speech tomorrow, you can beam in and give us your impressions of what's happening. So thank you,
yes.
And good luck there.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
Good luck. Bye-bye. Welcome, Vandana.
Hello, Jim. Hi.
Listen, we're going to just take a couple of minutes with a youth presentation. Sue Lennox from Australia, who I know both know each other, is on standby. It's 2 a.m. in the morning for her. So give us a few minutes and then we'll circle back. But Sue, welcome from Australia. I know it's the middle of the night, but you wanted to be part of the program. So take a moment to tee up our young person for today.
Wonderful, Jim. Thank you. And namaste, Vandana. Wonderful to see you. I wanted today to introduce Abigail Quick. And Abigail is from Guatemala. And she is a young leader from the Mayan tradition, who I had the privilege to meet in 2012 when she came to Australia to participate in a 5-week climate resilience leadership program that we were running in partnership with Project Ceres. And goodness me, Abby is one of the most wonderful young people that I've met. And I keep saying that about the young people that we have here speaking with you. And let me just, today what we're going to do is to have 2 videos about what Abby is doing in her role as co-CEO in Ceres, and then we'll just come back briefly at the end for a quick chat. So Georg, are you good to go? Abigail Quick from Ceres in Guatemala.
Mi nombre es Abigail Quick. Tengo 26 años. Mis papás y mi mamá son de aquí. Ellos son de aquí de San Juan. Yo nací en una aldea en Santa Lucía, Ocotlán. Se llama Pamezabal. A mi mes de edad me trajeron para acá, para San Juan. Somos 6 hermanos, 4 hombres y 2 mujeres. Juan se ubica en las orillas del lago de Atitlán. En idioma tutujil se llama Xecucuaba, significa bajo la tinaja de piedra. Es que arriba, en una de las partes altas, tenemos una piedra como que forma un huacal. Y dentro de ella, en épocas de lluvia, se llena con agua. Somos una comunidad que nos encanta trabajar con nosotros mismos, como comunitarios de San Juan. Tiene mucho que ver el legado de nuestros abuelos, ¿no? Ha habido momentos en los que no me hubiera gustado ser quien soy, pero también hubo mi momento en aceptarme quien soy y valorar todas esas costumbres, tradiciones, todos los valores que eso significa, ¿verdad? Porque me hace ser una única persona en el mundo y sintiéndose orgullosa de quién es. Me enorgullece ser una persona tranquila y hablar mi propio idioma y vestir mis trajes, ¿verdad? Eso es bueno. Yo me acuerdo que en la primaria y básico nunca fui una niña extrovertida. Nunca me metí a organizar nada, a liderar nada. No era líder en ese, o sea, no lo hacía. Yo conocí a Ceres en el 2011. Solo me pasaron los datos de que en esa época eran los que estaban a cargo, ¿va? Y yo le escribí, ¿va? Diciendo quién era yo, un par de fotos de lo que yo hacía en la comunidad. Ellos tenían un congreso en ese año, que es un espacio abierto, más que todo, donde tú puedes ser quien eras sin ser juzgada, sin ser vista de otra manera, más que valorada por tus ideas, más que todo. Nosotros tuvimos la oportunidad con otros 2 jóvenes acá en Guatemala para ir a Australia para capacitarnos en temas de resiliencia frente al cambio climático. Estuvimos en septiembre y octubre del 2012. Tuvimos la oportunidad de capacitarnos para facilitar los congresos de juventud liderando al mundo, que acá en Guatemala pues obviamente es juventud liderando por la Pachamama. Ceres te abre la mente para empezar a hacer eso, adoptar esos cambios y empezarlas a practicar de la manera personal, ¿verdad? Les vamos a decir que es momento de hacer los cambios y les voy a presentar algunas ideas de cambio.
Buenos días.
Buenos días. El círculo de banano, el ocoblock. Para hacer las compras hay que llevar todo, ¿no? El agua pura. Terminamos con su presentación y quiero terminar con el pulso humano y la dinámica de los expertos en las comunidades. Es mucho en una hora y media. Desde chiquita pues tuve el privilegio de estudiar en las escuelas públicas siempre, estudio tras estudio. Mi mamá y mi papá han tratado de educarme en otras áreas que no se puede conseguir en las escuelas públicas acá en Guatemala. Poder tejer, de poder hablar mi idioma, habilidades como trabajar en la tierra, ¿va? No tengo pavor a eso, me encanta hacerlo. Es ahí donde nace la idea de tener en mi casa el huerto, la casa de adobe, construir de manera más sostenible, de tener más, valorar mucho los conocimientos de mis padres, ¿verdad? Que ellos saben mucho de cómo cultivar. Siempre estoy llevando conmigo mi propia bolsa, que está hecho con manta, que es algodón natural, servilletas y canastas, ¿va? Para hacer las compras. La pregunta al final es, ¿qué haces tú por cuidar de los recursos naturales? ¿O qué estás haciendo tú para ser más sostenible?
Okay, Jim, Gail, when you're ready, we can switch over to the other video, which is 2015 UNESCO in Paris.
I'm not hearing anything. Do you guys like sound is on, but I'm not hearing her.
No.
Me neither.
It's weird because
Maybe it has no sound until she speaks.
possibly.
On behalf of CERES, our facilitators, ESD ambassador, and young people across Guatemala and El Salvador, I would like to express our gratitude to UNESCO, the government of Japan, and the GOI Peace Foundation for this honor and recognition. Ministers, ambassadors, UNESCO representatives, friends, and fellow laureates, the task is not small, nothing short for a transformation of a society at every level. We believe that young people, with their energy, ideas, and passion for a better tomorrow, are one of our most valuable resources to help drive this transformation. CERES is committed to training a core of 7,000 ESD youth leaders and ambassadors by 2020, who are leading the way towards a more just, sustainable, and peaceful society. Wherever you are, whatever you do, we invite you to join us. Hara haptik ehewin ni malach martiosh. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gail. So it's been amazing to watch Abigail and the team at CERES in Guatemala and El Salvador just go from strength to strength in their work with young people. And we particularly saw the value of this network of young people, young leaders that are actively innovating their own ways of creating change in their own communities, really come to its full strength during the time of the volcanic eruptions in Antigua. And what happened is that they were the people who were on the ground and were able to quickly jump into roles of being frontline and early responders to this tragedy. And I think that's one of the things that we're learning, is that as we actually weave this global web of youth leaders that are self-organizing and motivated and committed and interconnected with each other, that they're the ones that are actually stepping up when trouble happens. You heard that as well earlier in the week from the team in Sierra Leone. So that's it from me today. Jim, have you got any comments? Or Vandana, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Just say hello to the young leader. Yeah.
Go ahead, Vandana.
No, I was just saying to say hello to our lovely young Guatemalan leader.
I will pass that on to you. She's busy running a leadership program this week herself, so she couldn't join us, but I will share that. She'll be delighted. She would love to meet you. Jim, I will miss tomorrow because I'm heading up to the flood impact zone to be running some community workshops over the weekend, but I look forward to seeing you again on Monday, and have a really good day today. I will get back to bed shortly.
Thank you so much, Sue. Good night. Again, that's so extraordinary, everyone, that people like Sue Lennox are working tirelessly for decade after decade, get up at 2 o'clock in the morning local time to be part of a broadcast because of her passion around the environment and her passion around supporting emerging youth leadership. It's quite extraordinary, Sue. So I just want to acknowledge you and thank you very deeply on behalf of all of us. And now I'd like to welcome Vandana
Hello.
Vandana is a good friend and colleague. We've had her a number of times on Humanity Rising. She's a passionate crusader and campaigner for human rights, for ecological rights, for the rights of all people to make free decisions, and to be free of the pesticides and the contaminants and the pollutants that so infest our food and our environment and our clothes and just about everything that we ingest. It's the assault that we have created on our own bodies. And our earth has been quite an extraordinary thing. And Vandana Shiva, as you all know, has become a global activist and global citizen on behalf of all of us to protect our land, and was successful in protecting India from the ravages of Monsanto. She's written over 20 books on various dimensions of ecology and governance. So Vandana, thank you so much for everything. And why don't we start, given the fact that this is the COP, and you've been through many, many COPs in your time. Let's just begin with your assessment of COP27 there in Sharm el-Sheikh. What do you think is at stake? And what do you think will be a possible outcome?
Well, you know, I was in Rio when the international legally binding treaties were created, the UN Framework on Climate Change for Climate and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So the COPs are still happening, but shifts have taken place. Most people don't realize that the legally binding agreement was killed at Copenhagen. After that, it's voluntary commitments. And frankly, if it's all about voluntary commitments and it's just about popular pressure, then it's not a COP anymore. You know, it has stopped being that. But a big part of the shift is that 92 was the Earth Summit on Environmental Laws. 95 was the World Trade Organization to outsource all the pollution. And the entire structure got confused because the economies were now global, but responsibility was according to the land on which the pollution was being emitted, not the ownership. And I've written about this in the book I wrote in the lead up to Copenhagen, not expecting it to be totally subverted. My book, Soil Not Oil. I wrote it because, you know, the huge ecological footprint of industrial agriculture. You know, I decided to start calling it fossil agriculture. Because, you know, somewhere it's called green revolution. When it's brought to our part of the world, it's suddenly made green. Somewhere else it's called industrial agriculture. Somewhere else it's called modern farming, scientific farming. And at the end of it, what is it? It's basically taking living systems of the earth and collapsing their capacity to meet our needs, just to sell leftover war chemicals. So synthetic fertilizers are fossil chemicals. A kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer uses 2 liters of diesel, and then it destroys the atmosphere, 300 times more damaging than nitrous oxide is than the carbon dioxide. Kills the oceans with a runoff. 90% of that fertilizer is running off because plants take what is naturally in the soil and created by the soil food web. These external inputs don't really feed the plants, they feed the profits of the industry. So 90% runs off and kills the oceans. If you go and see the maps of the dead zones growing in the mouth of the Mississippi, the mouth of the Ganges River, where all these fertilizers are going. And then the soil dies because the soil organisms need organic matter as food. They don't need toxics. Pesticides come from the same. 50% of the greenhouse gases, if you look at the whole industrial food chain, from the production to the chopping down of ancient forests in Amazon to grow GM soya, most of it used for biofuel and animal feed, not for feeding the world. Or the Indonesian rainforest, which will go by 2030 at the rate at which they're being destroyed for palm oil. That's 20%. Another 20% is taking good food and processing it to death to make us sick. 75% diseases are chronic diseases because of ultra-processed food. Or shipping food thousands of miles, and we saw with COVID how the supply chains just collapsed. It's a hugely energy-intensive, highly unstable system. And then the packaging. Yeah? All of this is resource and energy intensive, adds another 20%. And then when you grow food as commodities, not for eating, when you grow food for eating, you grow diversity, because the soil needs diversity, insects need diversity, but our gut microbiome needs diversity. Yeah? We have 100 trillion microbes that each has a different taste. And you can't all feed them GMO soya, one day disguised as milk, and one day disguised as meat, and one day disguised as impossible burger. You know, that uniformity is the assault of chronic diseases. So when I wrote Soil Not Oil, I was trying to bring attention to the high costs and the huge role of industrial food systems, but also the possibilities of ecological agriculture, you know, intensifying the biomass, the photosynthesis, the biodiversity. I think right now, one thing that has definitely happened is agriculture is at the center of the discussions, except that there are two models of agriculture. You know, there's agriculture innovation mission of the United States. Again, you know, I was supposed to be in Egypt, but I couldn't go. And there's a huge campaign on that. The FAO and Rockefeller are running a whole show on smart agriculture. But Rockefeller was the one Rockefeller was Standard Oil. Standard Oil brought oil into our food system, and Standard Oil is now telling us how to get out of it. Of course, Standard Oil doesn't exist, but Rockefeller still does. So, you know, the Soil Not Oil issue is still relevant, because we can either organize our lives around our earth being and our earth citizenship, or we can organize our lives around oil and then play tricks of every kind. You know, outsourcing was a cheating on the carbon budget, you know. And I always said, you know, the company that says, this is mine, should then own the pollution too, shouldn't it? Yeah? It can't just own the profits. And I think national accounting systems for a globalized economy are totally obsolete. And that's why further, not only is the unit not fitting into the process, into the economic process and accountability, but now the unit is saying, you know, after Copenhagen, we'll just make voluntary commitments, and the voluntary commitments aren't adding up. And that is what is at stake. How do you create accountability? The first meeting of UNFCCC, the principle that was laid out was polluter pays. Yeah? The language of polluter pays has disappeared, which is so understood. You know, here are polluters, they should pay. Then a loss and damage, and everyone's haggling, and they said 100 billion will be given at, you know, they said in Paris. Every year's ecological damage of climate because of climate change in India is 85 billion, one country per year. So we are talking about unaccountability of costs, a total out of proportion system where systems of extracting profits, including the new carbon trading, are very well worked out. But how do you have accountability and responsibility? That ecological ethics, that basic ethics of being an Earth citizen, is in total shambles. And I think that's what we need to create. That's why I talk about democracy, you know, that we have to create systems at local, regional, national levels where the ethical consciousness, the ecological consciousness is what becomes the big public force and the big public consciousness.
Thank you so much, Vandana. As usual, your insight is very profound and deeply challenging, and gives us a sense of what isn't happening at the COPs, and therefore our situation gets worse and worse. I'd like to just, before we continue, just welcome Dr. Tamsin Woolley Barker into our conversation. She's the author of Teaming. She's been co-moderating the COP program with me over the past few days. And so, Tamsin, welcome. And do you have any, as we enter the dialogue here, do you have any comments on what Vandana has said or any questions that you'd like to put forward?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Vandana, thank you so much for your work and for your words. They are right to the point. Absolutely. Like, it just seems that there's so few people that are really responsible for this. And most people would just like to get to work on the ground in their communities. And, so thank you. It's closing the loop on the pollution, and you've been there through all of this. So thank you for sharing the journey and just what's going on. Thanks.
I think a follow-up question on the COP, Vandana, is around, Rhea Salter was just telling us with some excitement about all the leaders and personalities that are descending, and there's always a buzz when you think the president of the United States or the president of the EU or the president of India is coming to town, and everybody waits breathlessly for their speech. But against the backdrop of what you just said, that Copenhagen eliminated any compulsory understanding, and the issue of polluters pays, quietly disappears into the wrangling. As we've come forward into COP27, it feels to me anyway, that we've in some ways gone past the point of no return. And I say this because I think what happened at Glasgow last year in COP26 was in some ways the final realization that the governments, in fact, are not going to do anything. That to hold out any hope that Biden is going to make any substantial difference in his speech tomorrow is a fantasy and, in fact, a delusion. Do you agree with that? Do you think there's further utility with the COP? Do you think it should be continuing even though nothing ever happens? I mean, how do you understand the reality of the dysfunction in relationship to the crisis, and what the people on the ground who don't really have much power, like little Abigail in Guatemala, but nevertheless are passionate? That triangle doesn't square.
Well, at the end of the day, it's people on the ground who are bearing the brunt.
Yeah.
And therefore, their organizing is vital. They might not be able to implement the rules of polluter pays, but they can at least protect themselves and create the kind of economies that increase their ability to be resilient and to bounce back. Because we are going to have more and more disasters, unpredictable disasters. We used to have one cyclone in 2-3 years. Now we get 3 cyclones in a year. It is said in the Gita, for stability, I am, Krishna says, I am the Himalaya. And here the glaciers are melting. So I think the first thing we have to do as citizens is to learn how to be resilient. The second thing we have to do is build our communities to shift the economy, because this current economy, Shannon talked about, it's known that 1% is primarily responsible for all the pollution. Now, and that includes every kind of pollution, including the climate pollution, the greenhouse gas pollution. Look at the number of private jets, that flew to Glasgow, and there are more. I think it said 200 more in Egypt than in Glasgow. So as it is, UN treaties are heavy. I mean, I stopped going to UN treaty making when everything became about a comma and a square bracket. And the substantial ability to give content to international law, in international environment law, it was that kind of being eaten away. In the last few years, basically, the polluters have hijacked. The toxic polluters have hijacked the food summit. The climate polluters have hijacked the climate summits. And I wrote my book, Oneness versus 1%, because I watched the hijack of the Paris summit. Everyone feels very excited. but they didn't watch Mr. Gates running the show. Yeah, they didn't see Zuckerberg saying most people will not be needed. You know, artificial intelligence is going to save us. And I think, you know, a much more clarity on our part of how the earth works, yeah, and that the fact that the biosphere and the atmosphere are one earth. Yeah, I used to joke with my friends because I started focusing more on biodiversity. I played a role in both, but then I said, no, I can do the work with biodiversity and seeds and all the rest. And then my friends just went into the stratosphere. I said, if you don't connect your work back to the ground, we will not find the solutions. If we stop fossil fuels, in a decade, we can pull out all the excess carbon dioxide through biodiversity regeneration, building back the biosphere, and doing more food production in the process, growing more oxygen. I mean, just look at the data. People forget this. James Lovelock called the Earth Gaia because he realized she manages her climate. She's a self-organized entity. And the calculations, you know, without life, the temperature was 290 degrees, and it was brought down to 13 degrees. And carbon dioxide was 98%. It was brought down by the biosphere, by plants, by photosynthesis to 0.03%. Now, shouldn't we be looking at that as our main teacher for solutions? You know, I think as a scientist, I find it very strange. We've created a problem called climate change. Now we look at climate change as the origin of everything. No, it's a consequence. And we should be looking at the wrong actions, ethically wrong, ecologically wrong, and change the track. Our big work right now is to create local, living, regenerative economies so people can protect themselves.
Thank you so much. I'm totally 100% with you on that. I feel like the decision makers have so much ignorance about the way that life actually works. And, you know, and that's true from top down, top to bottom. Like an MBA doesn't even require a biology class. They have no comprehension of living systems. So I thank you for pointing that out. And also, do you see any means or any movement to financially restructure the money from this top canopy kind of atmospheric level down to the ground, down to communities, and like you're talking about local economies? You know, we have all this money, but where is it going to go?
Well, you know, again, I mean, life is a pork at every moment. And one path is the polluter pays, and all the resources needed to regenerate become available and distributed to the people who need it and who are suffering the impact. So they need the money first to build back their homes, you know, to be able to grow back their food. And second, do the additional work to heal the earth. Yeah. And the wonderful thing is the people who are suffering most are willing to do that additional work. But exactly at the time where the money machine should be giving back, it's already looking at how to make more money in a fictitious way. So just before Glasgow, a month before Glasgow, Rockefeller Foundation and the New York Stock Exchange cooked up a whole new asset class called nature asset corporations. And these would basically take real resources and put them on financial markets and financialize nature. And of course, then you can miraculously multiply, but the rivers don't come back. The soil doesn't become fertile. And they're looking at 4,000 trillion of fictitious money. So as it is the fictitious money created, I mean, 10 trillion or 13 trillion in the hands of BlackRock, robbing the homes of people, you know, suddenly housing has become a big investment. Food, everyone is in food because you can't live without food. Everyone is into food. Gates is into food. BlackRock is into food. So I think the issue of money needs to be revisited, not only because most people have been robbed of what little money they had. They will be robbed of the remaining through digital currencies, you know?
Right.
And one little thing, when I wrote a recent book, I wrote and said, everyone begins with money, but money is a derived measure. The real currencies are the life of the soil, the life in the river, water is the currency. So I've always said, life is the currency of life. Money is the currency of the market. And of course, the two meet. But if the currency of the market gobbles up life, then what you're going to have is more tragedies. And I just feel for ordinary citizens to keep their minds alive, to understand what's going on in the world, to make their choices, so that their future and their community future and humanity's future. You're talking of humanity rising, that humanity's future as a common future, that we really imagine it on a different path than the predictability of collapse. Like, I'm fed up of the language of collapse.
Thank you.
Because no matter how much you talk about it, if you don't do something about it, you are going to have it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So much reimagining is required. I mean, I think about what would our financial systems look like if they worked like nature does, how life works. But there's just such a misalignment. And so I think about, the parasitism of the financial system is really designed to do that.
Exactly. And I think imagining other economies that work without this total control of money, use money as it should be used, like a means, and have minimal dependence on fossil fuels. I think we really should start organizing journeys to see how people live differently, to trigger the imagination, So, Navdanya, of course, we have our university, we have our courses, but we also organize our journeys, which came to a stop during the 2 COVID years. But I think it would be really good, to have fossil fuel free imagination journeys to real communities that actually live without that dependence.
That's such a beautiful, powerful thing. We've been talking a lot in my group ever at Team Lab about restructuring finance to tell the nature of place, the stories of places, and just like you say, fossil stories, and just so that people can even imagine an alternative, but also like that potential comes out of the local, comes out of uniqueness. That's how life works, right? It's the exchange. It's diversity. I think if we could, I'm trying to come up with ways that could draw funding down to the local through storytelling like that. I like that.
Vandana, I'd love to just focus on what's going on in India for a moment, since oftentimes the news is skewed to the West and the North. And I know the last time you were on Humanity Rising, you were talking about the plight of the farmers. And, not only there's the decimation of the water supply, the biopiracy that's going on, the corporatization of farming that's going on with the Modi government, the escalating number of farmers that were committing suicide because of the basically the dynamic that you were just alluding to, that the money of the market is consuming the currency of nature in a way that farmers who are in that interface are being destroyed en masse. Tell us more about what's going on. Provide an analysis of the climate situation there in India, and just so we increase our understanding. India is a massive 1.23 billion people and one of the most populous countries in the world, and what happens in India really matters.
Yeah. So first, India's population was stable till 1815 because we've had tremendously good records of revenues, productivity, population. Over centuries, our population was stable because we didn't have private property rights. Land was used and everyone knew the carrying capacity of their 2-acre plot. when the British took over the land, that's when the graph of population starts to grow, because with it, the displacement of the peasants, exactly like the enclosures of the commons in England, the Scottish clearances, the Highland clearances, which displaced people and they went to Nova Scotia. Yeah. So everywhere population grew with displacement. And yeah, the population of India is huge, but why are so many dying in terms of farming? Indian farmers are about the most resilient people I have met. There'll be 3 years of drought, they go to the town, they'll run a rickshaw. The minute the rain comes, they go back to the village. When lockdown happened, they all abandoned the city and went down to their villages. The suicides grew with globalization. Literally, you can count them from 1995. With Monsanto coming in with the monopoly on BT cotton, that's where the highest suicides are. So we've lost 400,000 farmers to suicide since 95. And this is government data, it's not my data. The government data also shows you
400,000 suicides since 1995.
Right.
Take that in, everyone.
Yeah. And 85% of these suicides are in the cotton belt. 95% of the cotton is now a Monsanto monopoly.
Wow.
And 770 billion rupees extracted without them having a right, because I worked with our parliament to say we don't invent plants and animals and seeds. These are not human inventions, therefore they cannot be patentable. Article 3J of our patent law. In spite of that, Monsanto lied to the Indian seed industry, locked them into licensing arrangements, stopped them from doing their work, they became basically distributors and promoters of the BT cotton. So, the cotton doesn't work because it's hybrid, it needs irrigation. Cotton is a dry land crop. Most of the farmers don't have irrigation. So because of drought, the crop fails. It's an absolutely failed technology. You can't change a plant and put a toxic gene into it and expect it to control best, because plants have their own intelligence. They have their pest repelling qualities. You've killed that property of the plant. And now it's expressing this BT toxin. And because it's just expressing this one toxin, the bollworm evolves resistance, because that's predictable, when there's just one pressure. And meantime, new insect pests have become created, the white fly army. Well, we never had them in cotton. So you're using more pesticides. You're spraying more. 135 people died in year 2017 in one little area where the BT cotton is growing. And I started, when I realized the farmers were killing themselves, and I realized there was no alternative. I had hunted. It took me years to look for old GMO-free cotton seeds. And then we trained the farmers to do organic. And then we worked with the Gandhi ashrams to do the hand-spun, hand-woven organic products. And the farmers are earning more. The soils are much richer. The soils in the BT cotton area, when we did the study of 10 years of planting, 60% of the beneficial soil organisms, the fungi, the bacteria, were all finished. Because the toxic is in the roots too. It's in the leaves. There are no pollinators in the BT cotton fields. The honey industry has just collapsed where there's BT cotton. So we are really talking about a thoughtless experiment, just because 3-4 companies decided, we can make royalties out of money, and they knew they'd be able to sell more chemicals. Look at the explosion of glyphosate sales after Roundup Ready GMOs were introduced in the United States. Look at the cancer epidemic. Look at the fact that these toxics are killing the monarch butterfly, 90%, So when we think of the farmers of India dying, we should think of all of the species which are being pushed to extinction by an agriculture, which is a fossil agriculture, whose only objective is how to push to extinction. Pesticides to kill the insects, herbicides to kill the plants, and now, fungicides to kill the fungi. So I think that war thinking, that, we are at war with nature and her biodiversity, that is really at the root of the problem. And we will not be able to address the biodiversity crisis, the extinction crisis, or the climate crisis till we re-establish a loving relationship with our earth.
Thank you. It's so clear that our decision makers lack any kind of grounding in living systems or any understanding of that. You know, it's not a machine. And like you said, it's a war machine because all of that fossil industry came out of World War II. I mean, it literally is a repurposing of the military industry.
Yeah.
Now, Vandana, let me ask you, I'd like to focus on Monsanto because you're well known for stopping Monsanto several decades ago with the seeds and so forth and so on. How did that accomplishment give way to Monsanto doing what it's doing in the crop industry? I'd love to hear that story because that means that the bad guys never sleep. So even though you beat them at one level, they did an end run, and it looks like that they are now pretty well ensconced in India. Yes.
Well, they're trying very much because the latest attempt, first of all, Monsanto has been bought up by Bayer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Monsanto has disappeared. Bayer is the responsible company now. And right now we are in the middle of renewing our movement because the way these corporations work is they always work with Trojan horses. When they realize, first of all, they never come straight. They always find an Indian company because they can't work in the terrain, in a totally new country. So they partnered with Mahiko for the BT cotton. And now they've got another Trojan horse, and they're trying to pretend that, when we did this research, there are about this many patents held by Monsanto, Bayer, which used to be Mobe during Hitler's time, and they're back again as one. As Monsanto created the Roundup Ready seeds to sell more Roundup, this GMO mustard is a BASTA resistant, a glufosinate resistant, but it's even more lethal. Monsanto took a hybrid, what Bayer's technology, and they had applied for a patent, which was a patent for an approval for GMOs. It was rejected in 2012, but they're trying to come back again. And I'm so happy, the farmers who were protesting when we last talked, they've just announced we will not allow these trials to take place because right now they have to do the trials and 3 years later they'll be allowed. And, mustard is the color of our spring. When our babies are born, we massage them with mustard. Mustard is an antibiotic, an antifungal, but it's the original mustard seed that has these qualities, not the canola, which has removed everything, the flavor, the nutrition, the health. So this is a GMO canola. They've added lethal genes in it. One is a gene called Barnase. And this, basically the protein from this gene kills all cells and basically creates sterility. Then to breed the next generation, what they have is another gene called BASTA. Now in nature, Barnase and BASTA are in a soil organism, and they're always together. So that the cell-killing gene doesn't work alone. You always have to have the fertility gene, and they're kept in regulation. That's why regulation is so important. Now they're deregulated, like the deregulated globalized economies. Then they have another gene called BAR, which is designed only for glyphosate tolerance, glufosinate tolerance. Then you have another gene for pumping up these traits. They call viral promoters, cauliflower mosaic virus. Each of them has lethal impacts on any living organism. And, they found and think that it's in the leaves. We eat the leaves, mustard, sarson ka saag is one of our most favorite dishes in winter. Sarson ka saag and makki ki roti we'll be eating. They're going to poison it all. Yeah. So, of course, they try, we try. The poison cartel doesn't give up. But the lovers of the earth and lovers of life and biodiversity, we also don't give up. We haven't given up.
Life finds a way, right?
Tamsin, I think you're making a very important point that there's a historical root to this mentality that that came out of Germany and the Nazis, and this whole the ferociousness with which they were treating other people, they applied to nature, and it's a continuation essentially of a Nazi mentality. And I think it's important that we acknowledge and recognize the historical roots of what Vandana is facing in India, and what is obviously going on in the United States with the genetic modifications and so forth and so on. It's an ideology.
It is. It came. I mean, the eugenics movement came. Well, it really came from the United States, and then the Nazis picked it up, and so it's really all one thing: the military-industrial complex.
Yeah. And when you think of the roots of reductionist mechanical thinking that killed living systems thinking and the systems knowledge, was founded by Bacon. And Bacon was the Chancellor of England in charge of the witch hunts, of torture. So he took torture as a mechanism that he was imposing on society and took it into a scientific method to torture nature. And then in Hitler's Germany, the treatment they were giving to people they felt less, people they were inferior and should be exterminated, they applied that extermination ideology then to all of nature. So, if one was the witch hunts, and this was the concentration camps, but both of them are rooted in seeing diversity as a problem.
Yes.
And in nature and in good harmonious society, diversity is health. Diversity is harmony. Diversity is well-being.
Yes, I think we're just so overcome with this mindset of, machine mindset, where you can just replace a cog, one thing. And, and then with the science, we're in this scientific, I'm a scientist, of this looking through the microscope at a system that's by itself. And so I worked for a vice president of Monsanto, and he was so believing in that it was going to feed the world. But it really came from a mindset of that we could just change one thing like we do in an experiment. But in life, everything's connected. So these unexpected things happen that are not even considered in the experiments. And I think we're all suffering from that. I think it ultimately comes to a mind shift that's required, that it can, most people already have that understanding.
Yes, when you think of how many indigenous people are still around, how many small farmers are still around, how many women who are involved in the economy of care are still around, how many people with a new consciousness are growing, we actually shouldn't treat the COPs as the measure of where we are going. We should look at where the consciousness is growing and work with that.
It seems like there's so much that actually does work. And if we look for those things and funnel the attention, the energy, and the money to those stories, we have it. We're alive. We have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yesterday, Ed Muller, who both of you, the president of the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica, and a real passionate advocate for regenerative agriculture. What he was saying, Vandana, was that if there was a single acupuncture point that if we would organize around it would reverberate out and solve most of our challenges around climate change and global warming, it's regenerative agriculture. And he's been demonstrating in location after location in Costa Rica that you can take the most arid, polluted land, and if you just apply basic biodiversity principles, you can animate the land, bring back a species who apparently have disappeared, and completely revitalize the ecosystem in a way that also regenerates the human communities in that location and brings revenue and all kinds of abundance. Would you agree, given what you know about global warming and climate change, which is probably more than almost anybody out there, would regenerative agriculture be the point that you would emphasize if we were going to come together to solve the ecological and climatic predicament. Speak to us about regenerative agriculture generally and other priorities that you would recommend for anybody, say, at the COP who's willing to listen.
Well, I think the reason regenerative agriculture is so vital is when I, explain that 50% of the problem is industrial food systems, and 100% of the solution could be regenerating the land, the earth, the capacity of the biosphere to correct the imbalance in the climate. So I would definitely agree it is the single biggest issue. But for this, people have to become aware of the fact that food is what agriculture gives us. And we have to not allow ourselves to be confused with the greenwashing that larger and larger farms in the hands of Bayer Monsanto producing raw material of amino acids and protein to be fed into Mr. Gates' labs is going to be the solution for climate. No, these are energy intensive systems that will use even more energy. They'll use even more fertilizers. Mr. Gates has said this in his book. I love fertilizers. We need more fertilizers. So they're not looking at regenerative farming. They are looking at hyper-industrialization, one agriculture for the whole world, with drones and satellites and total control systems to produce bigger monocultures, no food at all. Farming without farmers, food without farms is the slogan of the ship. Now, this will make it all worse. So there are two reasons why the regenerative revolution is so vital. It is vital to, of course, regenerate the earth, but it's also vital to prevent the next colonization. Yeah, it's only when we are fully aware that, yes, we can regenerate the land. And yes, regenerative food is much healthier for us because it comes with all of these gifts of the soil organisms and all the phytochemicals that then nourish our gut. And the planet's health and our health is the same health. And I think the more we make these connections around food and agriculture, during COVID, it happened in a very natural way. People shifted to gardening, people shifted to local organic because they realized that the vulnerabilities of an industrial food diet was the comorbidities that was killing people. And I think we need to definitely not see regenerative farming as a silo that's only meant for those working on agriculture. Now, regenerative agriculture is another worldview that first recognizes that the earth is generative. You can't do regeneration without a generative earth, that the earth has the generative power. We are there in service to do the right thing and stop the harm. And definitely we need to be part of that regenerative thinking, the thinking through soil. And, not the thinking through oil, which has fossilized our minds with that mechanical thinking.
That's a great line. Think through soil, not through oil. That's a good one, Vandana. Very good. Now, everyone, it turns out Ed Muller was listening to our program. And so, Ed, I just want to acknowledge your extraordinary session yesterday and invite you to join the conversation with Vandana and Tamsin. Anything you would like to add?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I can't waste the opportunity to listen to Vandana. So I was listening. Yeah, it's just, we have such a big opportunity. I'm not focused so much on the corporate sector. I know they're doing a lot of damage, but I go more with trying to generate alternatives for local development and bringing small and medium farmers into the game. And actually also working with cattle a lot. We have more potential of drawing carbon down and putting it beneath our feet with cattle than we actually do with agriculture. According to Jeff Moyer and his team, we could pull out from the sky about 34 gigatons of carbon a year with cattle, and another 18 gigatons if we convert the agriculture to regenerative. But we do have to have landscape impact. So we have to work at bioregional levels. This is not an issue of farm to farm, because it's not only about drawing down carbon, it's actually by regenerating the flow of the rivers. The part of the country I'm living in, when I was a kid, the rivers were flowing all year round. Now we have at least 5 months where there's not a drop of water in those rivers. So the only way we can bring that back is by regenerating soil, that the water doesn't run off. And we have about half an inch of soil gone, topsoil gone every year due to erosion in this country, in Central America as in general. So if we can regenerate the soil, the water will be infiltrating, the aquifers will get full, the rivers will flow. We're working with biodiversity, and I mentioned yesterday how we have now in our food farms, community food farms, between 20 and 50% more insects than in protected areas in Costa Rica. And we're out now measuring the effect on bats and how they're coming back, and birds. So it's the, as Vandana said, we need regeneration as a whole. It's not only the soil, it's not only changing the agriculture, it's the whole mentality, our thinking, moving from reductionist to holistic.
Yeah, you don't hear them saying, bring back the rivers is the solution.
Yeah.
No, they'll say, no, we don't own the rivers. That's why the defense of the regenerating and defending the commons. Very right.
Yes.
Vandana, say more about the commons. I think that's a notion that's worth deeper exploration and definition. Talk to us about the importance of the commons in a world where everything is being carved up in the name of private property and private profit. The commons are really the context we need to return to.
Yeah, land was a commons for every culture. Go to Australia, go to the First Nations. Land was not property. Yeah, it was a relationship. And of course, you use the land, but you use the land with respect and with reverence. And colonialism is when property rights begin. And private property rights and titles to the land and ownership to the land. What happened with the enclosures of the commons in England was replicated throughout colonialism, and it was happening at the same time. My life's work has been resisting the enclosures of the biodiversity commons, because when the idea of patenting seed started, I said, no, but seed is a commons. It's a commons of the pollinators that gave us the seed. It's the commons with the ancestors who gave us the seed. It's the commons with the future generations that have a right to seed. It's a commons with the soil organisms that need to be nourished by the seed and will nourish the seed. So, I feel we've done a very good job in defending the biodiversity as a commons, as well as the knowledge of biodiversity as a commons. All the work on biopiracy is basically to say you're enclosing the commons and pirating. This is the fact that something's a common doesn't mean it's ready for theft. It just means it's protected by a community. A commons is not the absence of rights, it's the absence of predatory rights. And in my book Soil Not Oil, I have a section where they're actually starting to talk about the atmosphere as private property. And then all of these trading regimes in the Kyoto Protocol, as well as now, is the governments give to the polluters the atmosphere, which is a commons, and say, oh, you polluted, you privatized it with pollution. Now the atmosphere is there for you to have a bigger share and then do trading with those who didn't pollute. And I've always said, how can you do trading between the wrong and the right, the good and the bad, the pollution and the regeneration? They are two, they are not exchangeable with the same measure. It's a bit like, remember when the Catholic empire was collapsing? They had these things called indulgences. You could sin, but you could bring gold to the bishop, and the bishop would say, that's fine, you can keep going on doing adultery, that's fine, as long as you give me the gold. So in a way, what we are having in a lot of the climate discussions is new kinds of indulgences. And in a way, it's the same kind of continue to the wrong thing. the commons of the rivers, you know. I again feel our movement, the International Forum on Globalization, our work against water privatization, I think it made a huge difference, because wherever privatization was happening, we were collectively there supporting the movement. Bechtel, privatizing Bolivia's water. We were there. Or, you know, Evo Morales became president because of that movement. In India, they were trying to privatize the Ganges. World Bank trying to hand over the Ganges to Suez through a project. And when I saw this ad in the newspaper from Suez that, you know, we'll be selling water in Delhi, and I knew about the plant, I said, now they want to buy and sell the Ganges. And the World Bank head came to meet me because we built a big movement. And I said, no, I'm going to come with the women. They didn't let the women go in, but the women came with empty pots on their heads. And I had gone with a little copper pot, because we keep, you know, water in copper because it's a cleansing agent. And Ganga water is always kept in a pot. So I think his name was Zolik. And I gave him this thing as I was leaving. I said, I want you to keep this near your bed. And when you go to sleep, remember, water is not a commodity for everyone. For us, the Ganges is sacred. And when you get up in the morning, remember again, water is a commons. It is not there for you to turn into a commodity. And in a way, if you turn to anything now, knowledge, information, everything is now being enclosed as a commodity. And our work is to, A, regenerate the commons, regenerate the capacity to work collectively as community, because you can't have a commons without community. Individuals can't run a commons. So you need to regenerate community, which means you need to regenerate response. We've had too long a period talking about individual rights. Now we need a decade of cultivating common responsibility. And out of that, of course, flow the common rights.
Brilliant. And, you know, Tamsin, this is the superorganism. Right. This is teaming. The commons is another name for what you're talking about with teaming. Say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got this idea of the tragedy of the commons, that it's inevitable and all this doom and gloom, but our ancestors always had these small communities, and that was superorganisms like ants and honeybees, and we live in these communities, and you know how they protect them. We did the same thing. And so that's what that commons is. And now we don't have any structures for doing it. So now you have no way of protecting your commons from parasites that come in from outside and take all that value. I mean, I think that's what colonization really is. And so I think the challenge for us is restructuring and recreating those commons and those structures and those processes for even protecting and growing them.
Yeah, you know, the tragedy of the commons was so wrong. Yeah. Because the fact that there's a commons means one person can't keep taking. He works on the logic that everyone will keep putting more and more animals and it'll degrade. In a commons, you cannot keep putting animals. I have worked with villages. The rich person and the poor person all can only put 2 animals on the pasture. You know, you can't have the free market management in a commons. Commons has common management, common law management, common property management. And the responsibilities first come, you know, and the rights flow from that. If you manage your pasture, your animals will have grass. You manage the forest. My early studies on this valley, Doon Valley, you know, the village forest commons had more biodiversity than the native forests, because people were protecting and regenerating. And this is also the reason we created the community seed banks. And the community seed banks are the way out of that trap of debt and farmer suicides. You know, I feel so happy that whoever is participating in a community seed bank in the heart of the suicide belt is not in debt and is not committing suicide. It's only the people who've lost their seed, who are buying every year, who get into debt, and the unpaid. And you know, when the creditors come and say, you haven't paid the debt, your land is mine, that's the day the farmer takes his life. Right. So yeah, the commons is vital for our common survival. And the commons, it cannot be only for the human community, you know, because it won't be a commons, you know.
Right, it's for all our relatives.
It's all our relatives, right?
Now, Ed, how is the concept of the commons influencing your work in Costa Rica? Because you're doing extraordinary amount of activity on the ground in Costa Rica. Is that within the context of the commons, or how does the commons work there in Costa Rica and what you're doing to regenerate various parts of the land?
It's a little bit more complicated here because we have copied basically the whole land ownership, and this is private land, and this is my land and this is mine, and so we don't have what other Central American countries have. For example, Nicaragua has a lot of common land for communities, so nobody owns it, everybody owns it. Even the indigenous communities have had problems because they have common land, and they're always getting, the leaders drunk or killing them to buy a piece off, and they're losing their territories. So in terms of the commons of biodiversity, of air, of water, here again, there's enough legislation to actually be able to stop pollution, stop things, but no implementation from the side of the government. And the government is actually every time more and more right-wing extremist. In Egypt this week, our minister stepped down from the initiative we had founded last year in the last COP with Denmark to phase out oil and gas and even gold mine. And they're going for it now. And there again is the resilience of the community and environmental lawyers that have fought the government and previous governments. Oscar Arias, for example, yeah, he supposedly won a Nobel Peace Prize. I doubt it very much that he deserved it. And we had to take him to court, civil society, to stop him from a gold mine, which he declared of national interest. And then the lawyers that presented the case were sued for $800,000 each. And these are university professors. So how do you work around these to defend the commons when the legislation is there, but the political will isn't? And the people are very passive. We're not like Chile or Argentina or other places where people, get up and fight for things. People here are just, okay, sometime in the future. So I don't deal with that, not to complicate my life. I'm just working on the low-hanging fruit and demonstrating that we can regenerate and demonstrating that we can go against what's norm in the country. The seed banks, last year, the government wanted to pass a law that you can only use certified seeds. I mean, that was handing our whole seed process to corporates. And we had to fight it, again, through Congress, and we had the left-wing party make a whole deal out of it, and it managed to be stopped, not permanently. So what we're doing is we're rushing to get networks of community seeds and having people, start building on that. So by the time it gets approved, they can't stop it anymore. But we didn't have the tradition of community seeds. There are a few women that have organized themselves maybe 5-6 years ago. I know one group was 50 women that they trade all their seeds, and they have on Saturdays seed exchange. But that's not a very common thing here. Gotcha.
Now, Vandana, what is the presence or the position of the Modi government in Sharm el-Sheikh? I mean, you've just heard that Ed said that the Costa Rican government is basically retracting what they did in Glasgow. What's Modi saying?
Well, Modi will talk about the Solar Alliance. Yeah. And, they're making a lot of solar parks. And, for me, the climate issue, it becomes, not solvable because we take little pieces and say, I've done this, I've done this much renewable energy. In the meantime, 15% of one of our most pristine islands, then Nicobar Island. We're going to have new ports and new roads and new hotels. So we never look at the system as a whole. And, I've always talked about the Earth family, and I've always talked about Earth democracy. And it's very interesting. India will be hosting the G20 next year. And so much of the language of Earth family has come into the Indian slogans. So we are very, very good at both holding our ecological, civilizational principles as a civilization, which has sustained us till now, as well as all the systems that, that corporations love India for, because we've had an ecological civilization, because we had a Gandhian movement, we never allowed resource predation to be our model of development. And in a way, the risk for India is losing that capacity to live well without destroying the earth. To me, India is, don't destroy the earth, but have a good life. Enjoy the earth's gifts, but don't ruin it. And this difference between ruination and regeneration is a part that gets lost in the discussion for the simple reason, big newspapers, big TV, they just like this many million acres under solar panels.
Yeah, it is a nice headline is the accomplishment. That's sort of the goal, because that ensures the re-election. It comes down to something that crass and that simple. Yeah. Well, listen, as we bring this session to a close, Ed, do you want to make a quick final comment, then Tamsin, and then Vandana?
Sure. Well, as I said, it's always a pleasure to hear Vandana and Tamsin, actually. I hadn't been with her for a while, until yesterday. I think a key thing to move forward is we need to start working together around the planet, those that are doing the same thing. We're still working in isolation. We're still seeing how things are happening, and we don't have the power. We need to mainstream. We need to collectivize our actions. And I think we should really have some sort of stimulus, or I don't know how to call it, to actually really start collaborating. I know we're always full of things, and I don't even have time to follow a lot of the things that I'm supposed to be working in. And then yet another thing would be, okay, let's add another time for conversation like that. But I think the GRC, which we launched last COP, could facilitate collaboration and save us time. And I think we really need to look into being able to mainstream regeneration quickly. We don't have a lot of time, and we just have to give us our hands and walk together. And that isn't happening yet. More and more we see people coming together, but we don't have and that would be the game changer, I think, if we can go mainstream.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much for all you're doing. Tamsin.
Yeah, Ed, I do want to thank you for the Bioregional Regeneration Summit we just went through, and it was incredible. We had, I think, 1,200 people show up by the end. And so you're starting to get, people are connecting and working on bioregional and local. And I think that's the key. And I also wanted to point to some work that we're doing now in Team Lab. We're working with Brand Earth, Harry Uvegi and John Raymer at Sign Network. And what we're doing is trying to restructure finance so that it feeds these local community initiatives, and it feeds a process for doing so, like Ed's talking about. So a process for developing the unique potential of places, and then to finance that, to flow the finances to it. So we're looking at, skims on the foreign exchange markets, and skims on global payments, and getting the marketing executives. There's 5 major marketing groups in the world. And if those 5 CEOs would agree to funding these kind of stories of place, we could funnel that into, stakeholder capital developments for local places and bioregions. So I think there's a lot of potential there, but it has to happen on that restructural level. So I just want to thank you, Vandana and Ed for championing this and showing us it can be done.
Thank you, Tamsin. And Vandana, as you give us a closing word, I just want to note the bust of Einstein behind you, and also that beautiful picture. I can't quite make out who the Hindu god or goddess is, but speak to us about the sacred and the sacred feminine and the intelligence.
So I had sculpted that Einstein myself.
Oh, you did it?
Because Einstein, is the one who inspired me to do this physics and all of that. And this side is a hand-painted, handcrafted painting of Annapurna, the goddess of food. So in her hands are the 4 major crops that have originated in India. Banana, we still have 500 varieties of banana. And I remember my trip to Costa Rica, where they were all bandaged and put in plastic because they just won. And the pineapple plantations, where they're spraying so much pesticides that the people can't drink the water. She's got rice, which in India is the source of indica varieties. We have about 200,000. And sugarcane, because India domesticated sugarcane, quite contrary to what they say. So Columbus found it. No. We've been making local native sugar for centuries. So she's the goddess of food, and he's my inspiration in physics and science. And for me, both go together. That's why I keep both of them with me. Brilliant. Beautiful. Beautiful. Vandana, thank you so much. You are a world treasure. The Einstein-esque nature of your mind and the deep sacred feminine that you carry as your passion for the Mother Earth is just quite an extraordinary amalgamation of earth intelligence and feminine wisdom. And I just want to acknowledge you and thank you very deeply for all that you do. You inspire us every time. Very powerful. Thank you, Jim. And thank you for all you do, and to Ed and to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah. Bye, everyone. This will bring us to a close for today. You're welcome to the after session chat group. And we'll see you tomorrow for our 5th day with a conversation with Rupert Reed, one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, who will be talking to us about his perceptions of the Conference of Parties there in Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vandana, Ed, Tamsin. Bye for now.